Should be on camera, right?
I could have the justice. Welcome, everybody, to the Spring 2024 Tetherless World Constellation Lightning Talks. I think we have a few first-timers. For whom is this the first time doing a lightning talk at all, or a lightning talk, certainly lightning talk here. This is a really fun event that we do at some point in each term. It gives us all the opportunity to hear what everybody else is doing, the kinds of work that are being done under each of the professors that are part of the Tetherless World Constellation. By making a recording of it, which we're doing, it gives us also a record, a nice record of what's going on. So the basic rule is get up here and talk about what you want to talk about for about 2 minutes. We're not super critical. I don't keep a clock, although if you go too long, it will encourage you to stop. When someone finishes speaking, please thank them in a way that you would like to be thanked. And without further ado, let's kick it off with Neha.
Hello. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Neha Upadhyay. I'm a 6th-year student in cognitive science, and I work with Jim. So my research is a little bit different from most people in Tetherless. I work on behavioral research. So essentially, there are a lot of chronic conditions, including type 2 diabetes, that require sort of daily self-management. So you have to eat the right things, and you have to exercise, and even outside of diabetes, well, eating well and exercise can help with overall health. However, there are few behavior change interventions that show promising results, especially in the long run. Creating long-term behavior change is still a problem. One model that seeks to change this is the habit formation model, which shows that if of habits, then people will stick with the behavior even after the intervention has ended. However, habit formation is not sufficient. We also need to break unhealthy habits so that people don't revert back to behaviors they performed in the past. So my research, sorry, did someone say something?
Nope.
My research focuses on how to break bad habits, and I do this with the use of uncertainty. So a study I conducted back in 2020 with interviews of type 2 diabetics about their daily self-management saw that the pandemic actually impeded a lot of behaviors they were performing previously. So for example, you had people who ate a lot more unhealthily when they were out in social contexts, didn't eat so unhealthily anymore because they weren't in those contexts, and they didn't go and get takeout quite as frequently. But it also impeded healthy behaviors. So we saw that people who used to go to the gym couldn't go to the gym anymore because gyms were closed. And so essentially, the pandemic was a very, very large environment restructuring. But environment restructuring has been shown to break bad habits and cause behavior change. So the pandemic is obviously impractical as a behavior change model. And in addition, we saw that seeing that it was untargeted, it broke both healthy habits and healthy ones. So I sought to design a way that we could break habits that was targeted and that was low cost and feasible. And so I used uncertainty for this. And uncertainty here I define as there's two types of uncertainty. There's aleatory uncertainty, which is the uncertainty due to chance, or just, if you flip a coin, it's going to land heads or tails. There's 50-50. You don't know which one it will be. The other type of uncertainty is epistemic uncertainty, which is the uncertainty due to missing knowledge. So for example, if you're choosing between two options and you want to know two food options and you want to know which one is more calorie friendly, and that's not information you have, you're uncertain. But that information is out there, and so epistemic uncertainty can be resolved by seeking out more information, unlike aleatory uncertainty. So I designed an experiment to do this, in which we used the paradigm of sitting desks and standing desks. That is, we brought participants to a lab where there were half the desks were sitting desks and half the desks were standing desks, and we asked them to complete a cognitive task. And the uncertainty intervention provided was a sign on the back of the chair that was a caution sign that was warning them that the chair might be broken. In the first study, we saw that the sign was not on the chair. The instruction was given on the board. We saw that a lot of people didn't read the instructions, but we did see that participants were habituated to using sitting desks. So that was a good way to validate the paradigm. In the second experiment, where we put the signs on the back of the chairs, we saw that a significant portion of people hesitated upon seeing the signs, and that this hesitation was more if they saw it in the second session versus that they saw it in the first session. So the effect of delivering an intervention in a environment that they are already aware of was higher than the impact of delivering the intervention in a novel environment, thus saying that a targeted intervention is better than just a whole-scale environment restructuring. So along those lines, looking towards the future, that one of the things that would be good to see is that using habit breaking and using habit forming interventions together as this two-pronged approach to creating long-term behavior change.
All right, thank you. All right, and while Sol is coming up, I'm just going to
Throw my napkin on my ground.
change this around a little bit.
My napkin.
So I round and
It's on the ground, so hopefully it's in the trash.
Are we having slides or is it?
nope, no slides. That's just a background. Go ahead, Sol.
That's the wrong background.
Am I on camera fine?
If you are, you're perfect.
So hi, for people who don't know me, my name is Sola Shirai. I'm a fifth year computer science PhD student, and Deborah McGinnis is my advisor. And one of the areas that I've been looking into recently is data management, and more specifically data management for tabular data, so things like SQL tables and stuff. So in an ideal world where this everything is done very well, data management for these sorts of tables can be really easy. You have very nicely defined schemas, there's foreign keys, relations between tables and so on, and you can do everything perfectly well. But in the real world, what happens a lot more often is that either data is put together sloppily, or maybe it's put together from a lot of different organizations or subgroups or entirely different organizations. And so you kind of end up with a bunch of these tables that have all of this content, but it's pretty hard to tell how they actually relate together. And so one of the other problems that can come up there is that potentially you could look at all of the content of those tables to try to figure out, oh, these tables share similar concepts and so on. But that can also start to get expensive if you're working with a lot of different tables, or if you're working with tables that have a lot of content. And so one of the main ways that I've been trying to look into how this problem might be solvable in a slightly different approach is to try to make use of metadata that can be available for tables. So this kind of metadata might include things like the textual descriptions of what a table is, the table's names, the column names, descriptions of the columns if those are available, and any other sort of metadata annotations that are provided by people who make these original data sets. And then trying to see if we can make use of just this metadata of the tables to figure out whether tables are, for example, joinable with each other, or if they contain similar information. And so far with the work that I've done, I mostly have explored trying to predict table joinability between tables using just this metadata, and comparing against the actual joinability that we can get from inspecting all of the contents of the tables. And we've been able to see some promising results there. And if you want to hear more about that, I'll be talking about it during my thesis defense at the end of the month. And in the future, some of the things that I'm also hoping to be able to explore along the same vein of work is trying to see if we can also integrate together things like automatically generating metadata So there's obviously a lot of interest in generative AI, and there's work on generating things like descriptions for columns, descriptions for tables. And can we use that to kind of go in a feedback loop of generating metadata, using that metadata to make predictions or do other interesting things with tables that is hard to do with just the tables on its own, or it's expensive. So yeah, that sums up my work that I've been looking into, and that's all I've got. Thanks.
All right.
There'll also be a practice talk before at least one practice talk before the defense on February 29th.
Probably next week then, I guess.
29th.
Or 29th.
No, it's like
Yeah,
in 2
29th.
weeks, right?
Yeah. it's in 2
Which time?
weeks. 1 p.m.
So
There'll be an
Fernando,
announcement sent out at some point.
and after Fernando, it's Maruf.
I'm not going to get your feet this night. Single cookie for lunch.
Okay, so I'm Fernando. I'm a second year PhD student with Hoshani. And right now I'm like in the very early stages. I'm doing the RQE on within super alignment, which is, I don't know if OpenAI came up with the name for it, but OpenAI has started like a call for like work within this field. And the idea that what I'm specifically looking at with the strong generalization, which is trying to get a weaker AI model to train a stronger AI model and trying to get the best like results possible from that. And specifically what I'm trying to use is the parameter freezing during fine tuning, because with large language models and other types of models, but like specific, most notably large language models, when they train them, they'll do like the general training, what they call pre-training first, and then they'll train it or fine tune it on like specific tasks. And so during that fine tuning, they actually freeze a lot of the parameters so that they really are only training like a certain amount of layers. And normally it's like the last 30% of the layers, or 25%, that's sort of something like that. And I'm trying to see if adjusting the layers that are frozen can be a valuable way to avoid learning the mistakes of the weaker supervisor, or I mean something like that, because there was a research paper where they froze every layer except for just the last layer, and by just fine tuning on the last layer, they were able to teach the model to avoid using spurious features. This was a classification model. And so just that last layer was enough to avoid, to unlearn this mistake. So I think on the flip side, maybe by not training that last layer, you can avoid learning the mistake in the first place from the weak supervisor. I don't know if that's true yet, but that's the direction I'm going in.
That's research.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, I'm Maruf. I'm also a second year PhD student working with Oshani Saneviratne. So like Inwan and Fernando, I'm also taking my RQE this semester, and for this I'm exploring the area of automatic code generation and evaluation. And so this area has been an interest for quite a while, but until recently, most of the works have been done, and the approaches are like deterministic, and because we are talking about code here, not some natural language or something, so these codes need to be accurate and well performing. So now that the LLMs are here, there are some very good attempts to automatically generate codes like Copilot and AlphaCode by DeepMind, etc. But we are still not there. And if we ask the LLMs to generate code for us. We as humans need to evaluate that to see if that works fine or not. So there are research scopes here, and most of the works till now are on domain-specific languages, and the auto generations are for small code snippets. So what we want to do, we want to look for some neurosymbolic approaches, because symbolic reasoning is necessary to for the correctness of the generated code and for the correct evaluation. And we want to explore this field more in a specific domain, which is smart contract generation. For those who don't know what smart contracts are, they're just code run on blockchain systems. So this field is not yet very much explored. So we want to explore this area in this particular domain and see how it goes. That's all I have.
Right, you want
This is like the wrong slide, by the way.
That's the wrong back.
Yeah, I was trying to tell you earlier. Hi everyone, I'm Inwan. I'm also a second year PhD student with Oshani. And lately, I've been working a lot with like tabular data and especially data distillation. So as for motivation, there's a lot of real life data sets are still tabular data, and a lot of these state-of-art models on these data sets are still not neural networks. So there can be stuff like XGBoost. But one thing about XGBoost is if you are incrementally getting more data every day, and then to train the XGBoost model on it, you can't really like do another epoch pass on this new data. You kind of have to retrain a whole new model. So this becomes quite a big scalability issue. So what I was doing previously was looking into if we can distill tabular data such that this smaller synthetic, whatever representative data set can be used to train a classifier such that it performs not so horribly, I won't say the same, on the original test data. And this work has been explored in the computer vision. So what they were doing is, as with many other computer vision things, very neural. So they were, it's all gradient based. The data set is curated in such a way that it induces a particular gradient in the model, blah, blah, blah. But like I said, we don't want to use only neural networks in tabular data. So we did compare against some of the approaches there, but what we essentially found was you can use autoencoders, do like multitask fine tuning to label aware embedded space. And stuff as simple as k-means can work better than image distillation for tabular data. So we found that, and now we're trying to move on to a more foundational approach. So if you think about it, previous works have proposed foundation models for tabular data, but these are essentially classifiers. So what that means is that you have this one model, and you train it to do classification. You may adjust the last layer or whatever, but then your bottleneck becomes the model, because then the model is still a gigantic transformer-based model that handles like different size tables. So what we want to do is actually separate out the part where the classifier lives. So we want a foundation model that distills or encodes the data, and then then that data can be consumed by an arbitrary downstream model. So one may train their own, do their own optimization, and blah, blah, blah. And the reason we want to do foundation models with this is that, like, as we've seen in natural language, training on a large domain always helps. So I think this is kind of related to like Sola stuff, right? So tables may have semantics that could be transferable, right? So it could be from a completely different domain, but some column names, the way they interact, it still could be useful knowledge for the useful knowledge, like in general. It's just how we read tables too. So if we can somehow get these transformers to understand tables in that way and to produce an even more information-rich embedding, then we're gonna try out a bunch more other things, hopefully a little fancier than k-means this time, but data distillation and train models and show that it works good. Thank you.
What did you get into the AAAI workshop? Was it this or?
Oh,
other
the
work?
workshop was
Yeah.
actually LLM code generation. That was like a side thing.
Oh, that's that side hustle.
We did have a extended abstract for this one, tabular data. So and we have a submission in HCAD right now.
Okay,
No questions.
sorry.
That was a good question.
Yeah.
Eat more pie. We've got strawberry rhubarb pie and we've got peach pie. Eat more pie. That was a commercial break. Super Bowl break.
Hello, I'm Danielle, also a second year student, but I'm under Deborah McGinnis. So I've been leading a literature review of the space of faithfulness evaluation of explanations. So when you use a model, an AI model, especially an LLM, but any AI model, it's important that you get an explanation. You want to know why it outputted what it output. The question is, what if it's lying about that explanation? How do we know that that explanation actually reflects the internal decision-making process of the model? And the short answer is nobody knows yet. We surveyed over 40 papers, found almost 70 different metrics for measuring faithfulness, and nobody can agree on how to measure it. But we did find some interesting trends. A lot of metrics are focused on heat map explanation methods, where the explanation is just, these were the tokens most important to the output, which we can debate whether or not that's actually an explanation, but for the sake of the literature, that's what they call it, so it counts. But also, there's a lot of methods, a lot of metrics that use counterfactuals in their measure of faithfulness. The further questions to the model to see if it's consistent with explanations that it's previously given, or if it's just saying what it's saying because it sounds plausible. However, most of these counterfactuals, if they're not being generated by like regex on a templated explanation method, they're using another LLM to generate the counterfactuals, which really limits the coverage of those counterfactuals and how much we can rely on them in an automatic process to really be addressing the correct question of the explanation. So my work moving forward, in addition to continuing to work on that literature review, bringing the taxonomy we've made into an ontology potentially and continue to work with that, is to use large common sense type on knowledge graphs like Wikidata to help guide the generation of counterfactuals so we can ensure and measure the coverage of those counterfactuals so that they're more useful in these faithfulness metrics. And I will let you all know how that goes.
VJ's next.
Yes. I was just checking my title because I don't remember.
Oh. We won't hold you to it.
So, hi, my name is Vijay. For those who don't know me, I'm a fourth-year PhD student with Professor Jim Handler. And the topic that I'm discussing is something that I've been starting to work on for my final contribution of my thesis. And it's something to do with identifying clinically relevant concepts in black box models. So the idea behind this, or the motivation, is that a lot of black box classifiers are used pretty much day to day in medical setting these days, and they make decisions whether a given image is benign or cancerous, for instance, but they don't really, like Danielle was saying, the explanations are more like heat maps and stuff like that, so somebody has to interpret those explanations. But there's also concept-based explanation, which essentially is saying that the model relies on these specific concepts to distinguish a given image from its counterpart. But the problem with that is a lot of those explanation methods require a lot of annotated data sets for each concept. So for instance, you would say having darker pigmentation in this skin patch, it means that it's cancerous versus not. So the darker pigmentation is a concept. And you would need annotated data sets where people annotate each of those concepts, whether they're present or absent in images, to do this sort of training the model to first identify which concept exists and then to classify whether it's cancerous or benign, for instance. The idea that I'm pursuing is to skip that annotation part and try to use already pre-trained vision language models because they already have a sense of vision and language. So I can say instead of annotating images with darker pigmentation, I can just say darker pigmentation in natural language and extract those concepts from these models and directly use them. There is a few mathematical tricks in there, but that's what I'm exploring. And hopefully, if everything goes right, like the model should explain why a given image is cancerous in natural language with clinically relevant concepts that are taken from UMLS. Yeah.
Kind of a holy grail.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Matt Johnson. I'm a sixth-year PhD student under Deborah McGinnis. And for my research, I've been focusing on the problem of semantic tabular interpretation. This is the problem where you have a table of data and you want to integrate it or augment an existing knowledge graph with it. In our recent paper, we've developed a new algorithm to do this called the Semantic Data Dictionary Generator, SDDGen. In it, we train transformer networks to generate embeddings for the various subtasks, such as aligning a column to a class type, and generate an embedding for it, basically. We do this by combining the schema label, a data dictionary description from it, and various medical codes within that table of data. We then take the series of ontologies we want to align against and generate class embeddings for them. We have a very naive technique where we basically generate it from class labels. We then look for the closest neighbors of that within a minimum distance and provide that as kind of alignment targets. We recently, in one of our experiments for the paper, we compared this to kind of the current state of the practice. One of the codes from the yearly competition SEMTAB was KG code tab. They're fairly representative of the algorithms in this area, and we were able to outperform it by around 12x on our biomedical data set that we put together. When we kind of broke down and looked in the areas we failed, we found that, at least for us, where we did poorly were areas where we didn't have a good idea of the embedding space, of the class embeddings. So in our future work, we're looking at possibly improving by looking at other class embedding methods that actually, besides just this semantic data, look into the actual structure of the ontology itself to get better matches. So I think that's what I got for you guys today.
That's all I got to say about that.
All I got to say about that. I never know how to end.
All right, Sasha,
You know, right?
you up.
Right. Everybody, my name is Alexander Lucevich, codename Sasha around campus here. I'm a sixth-year PhD in cognitive science, proud and privileged to be working with Jim. And well, to start off, the single biggest impeding factor for progress in theory crafting cognitive science, besides this research and communication-oriented, is that many of the theories are domain-specific and thus incompatible with each other. You have emotions, motivation, perception theories. And so I'm a big fan of integrated approaches to human cognition. So speaking in Jim's famous three squares, the biggest square I work with the Psi-computational architecture, which offers integrated account for human cognition, modeling not only emotional, motivational, perception, long-term memory process, but also their interactions. The middle square is I work with human biases. And the smaller square, more specific one, is I work with specifically how human skill interacts with human biases. So contrary to common perception that with higher skill leads to alleviating the effects of biases, there's some research that suggests that, in fact, with higher skill, here specifically numeracy, the effect of bias is exacerbated if the data or the perceived information contradicts the subject's political beliefs. And interestingly enough, it's both symmetric for Democrats and Republicans. And so to situate or to model this, in fact, within the Psi architecture, one needs first to clarify whether this is a general effect that is that can arise when trying to satisfy any of the human needs, whether it's something related to the long-term memory module and long-term behavioral patterns, or whether this is in fact specific to group integrity, which the political parties represent, a horde. And so in my previous work, what I've done is I investigated the option A, being a general effect. So what I did, or we did actually rather, is we conducted an experiment where we set up a controlled randomized study where we randomly assigned the subjects to thirsty and non-thirsty conditions. So the need there was to drink. And we presented subjects with tasks which they had to solve where the data or the background story inside the tasks suggested actually they affirmed or contradicted their desire, namely that on one side that being thirsty is good, that dehydration is good, and on the other side, this dehydration is bad. The observed effect that was observed in prior literature was not reproduced. Hence, we ruled out option A. And what we're now in stages is we are in the stage of submitting an IRB proposal for the option B, it being rooted in long-term beliefs and behavioral patterns. And the challenge here is that these behavioral patterns have now to be separate from the group needs. And the target that we're currently aiming for is sleep patterns, because in the family you have always the black sheep that sleep late at night and everybody else is getting up early. So the sleep pattern seems to be quite individualistic. So we plan to conduct a study analogous to our first one, where we present the subjects with a complex problem which they have to solve by analyzing data, and the data either contradicts their belief that waking up early is good or waking up late is good, or affirms it. So this is currently my progress. Thanks.
Right. Hey, Shruti.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I am Shruti. I am a fifth year PhD student. I'm currently trying to finish up my thesis. My thesis title is an ontology-enabled approach for supporting user-centered and knowledge-enabled explanations of AI systems. I'm trying to address three research questions in particular. How do we represent explanations in a way that they're machine readable? Second question would be, how do we contextualize explanations using some form of domain knowledge? Final question is, how do we generate explanations in specifically natural language? For my first contribution, we developed a machine readable representation or so as to support the generation of explanations from their basically supporting components, spanning the spaces of user interface as well as AI models generating these explanations. The first contribution is currently open sourced as the explanation ontology. The second contribution is a method to be able to contextualize specifically model explanations using some form of clinical literature. So for that, essentially, we sort of developed a contextualization pipeline, which is sort of end to end, which is to say that we built the data extractors, as well as basically the question answering system, as well as basically the user facing dashboard. We found that basically clinicians were sort of liking some of these explanations. However, one of the dimensions they wanted to see within these explanations is basically actionability. That's not something that we were capable of supporting at that point, and I think that's something that can be avenue for future research. My final contribution, which is something which I have been discussing for a while, but then trying to implement recently, is basically the meta explainer. The meta explainer is a way to go from the user question to basically the final natural language explanation. So for this, I'm sort of trying to use my first contribution, the explanation ontology, so as to be able to generate different types of explanations. For example, basically, a kind of natural language contrastive explanation, counterfactual explanation, data explanation, or something to the effect of scientific explanations. So for this actually, it's sort of a three-step framework. The three steps being delegate, which is to be able to accept a question, uh, um, which is to be able to accept a question, and then to be able to break it down into something which is addressable by basically one of the explanation types we support. Decompose was the first step, sorry. Delegate is the second step, which is to be able to pass this question on to supported explainers. So for this, I'm sorry. So for this, I plan to use some of the kind of model explainers present in the IBM's explainability toolkit. The final step, which is basically synthesis, is to be able to take these several explainer outputs, filter them, and then to be able to stitch them together into a form of natural language. For this, I plan to look into retrieval augmented generation approaches on like basically knowledge graphs. And like also finally, like Danielle mentioned, some of the metrics for explanations are very vague. And so supposing we can try to use some quantifiable metrics so as to evaluate explanations, I think that'll also be a nice contribution. So I'm trying to finish up the work of the last contribution.
Thank you.
Is that it?
That's it.
Good TWed.
Good job.
Anybody, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, let me say something.
Yeah, go ahead. I might want to say something too.
Okay.
Deborah probably wants to.
All right. I'm Enrique. I'm a researcher in Tetherless World. I work several of Deborah's projects. So what I'm going to talk here is something that is probably nothing to do with machine learning or gradient learning or maybe explanations, but so it's something very deterministic, very controlled, just like the industry likes it. So a couple of months ago, I started to work with people from the IBIS. I always forget the acronym. So it's the RPI is Institute for the Environment and the Built Environment and Energy. I always forget what it means because I think the letters doesn't match exactly what. But anyways.
Energy, the built environment, and smart systems.
Yes.
I always forget too.
Yes. So you probably heard of those architectural engineering and mechanical softwares for designing things like AutoCAD, Revit, SketchUp, and several others. So you can basically go there, draw something that you want to build or construct or anything or design. Then you have that somehow created, right? It becomes a thing, like an actual thing. So initially, Autodesk, which is the owner of AutoCAD and the others, they are the biggest players, of course, until today. And there was the need of how can we move our data models because everything was becoming kind of computer ruled, right? So you couldn't like just print a blueprint and ask people to follow that blueprint, right? As printed. But they wanted to translate that model to other software potentially created by other vendors. So they needed to interoperate their modeling with several other players, right? So they started this common data model within Autodesk. I don't know the full history, but that group detached from Autodesk at some point, and now it's called Building Smart, which is an organization that actually controls that agreed data modeling for those things today. So the data model is called IFC, it's the short for Industry Foundation Classes. And they have several versions. I think the current version is 4 point something, 4.3. It's an ISO standard. And several big projects are mandated that they share data and among them using that data model, right? So it's a data model. It's a serialization format called step file, right? And also has constraint checking, right? So for instance, if we're creating like a door, they have constraints to say that, oh, this door needs to have a location, that needs to have hinges, that needs to have like a handle and so forth. So things like that, right? So the data model controls all this. There are constraint checking to make sure that, let's say you design an engine, parts need to conform so they don't produce something that is not usable, right? Doesn't work. So they have this. And this is based on a very old language called Express. I never heard it until 2 months ago about that. Have you heard of this language called Express?
I heard of it.
Yeah. So it's basically like, it's a data model, like classes look like object oriented, but they have some constraint expressing rules so you can check against. But this is works. It's very good, but it's getting outdated. So with W3C kind of backing up some newer building models as ontologies in RDF and other efforts coming up like the brick schema, which is heavily used in the US for defining buildings. This model is quite not compatible with linked data at all. The industry is they always skeptical about linked data, of course. They do not like this open world idea, right? They have their reasons. But Shackle came out like 8 years ago, right? And they loved Shackle because it allows you to constrain checking a graph, make some validation. So it was very, very easy. So this work that people in EBIS are doing is very interesting because it kind of mixes this flexibility of RDF in linking to those other resources with the constant tracking that Shackle enabled. So what they did up to today was to recreate all the IFC constraints as Shackle shapes, right? And they are able to use the instance data examples that they get a hold of to test those constraints. So they're able to get from the original files, go back to a graph representation, have them checked against the Shackle constraint that they created, and they're able to create Spark construct pairs to link to other ontologies. You could brick, bot, and Prov is in the works. So that's very interesting. Of course, the industry is not very, I don't know, buying the idea yet, but it's a very interesting route to follow. Although they have officially backed up the IFCL effort, which is another effort to represent the IFC rules as all axioms, right? And this is official, but it's not. No one uses it, but it is backed up by them. But let's see what happens next. But yeah, basically this.
All right. All right. So now for something completely different. How many of you know what a slide rule is, besides Deborah?
Slide rule?
A slide rule. A slide rule. Like Matt's kind of. What do you think a slide rule is?
Kind of like an old calculator or some sort.
Yes. So, how many are familiar with the mathematical idea that multiplication is the same as adding logarithms? Okay. So slide rules date back somewhere to about the 16th or the 17th century. And the most common idea, you may have seen these slide roofs if you watch old movies, if you watch the Apollo 13 movie with Tom Hanks, the engineers in mission control are checking calculations. And what they're doing is they're sliding one stick that is marked off with it's a logarithmic scale. It's a logarithmic measured scale. And by sliding these sticks, you can actually from your perspective, and do a multiplication or reverse it to do a division. Okay. The precision of that calculation depends on the physical size, amount of how close you can get those gradations together. And a bigger slide rule, most of those engineers in Apollo 13 were using slide rules that are probably canny or pickets that are about this long, okay, which is a pretty good slide rule. Now, imagine a slide rule that's 30 feet long. Okay, imagine the precision that you could get with a slide rule that's 30 feet long. The precision is about 5 digits or so. Okay, so, but how do you work a slide rule that's 30 feet long? What if you chopped it up? What if you chopped it up into 18-inch chunks? What if you physically put it together in kind of a drum type of thing? So an RPI graduate from 1863, Edwin Thacker, invented something called the Thacker calculating instrument, which does exactly this. It's if you can imagine, a drum with scales written on it, breaking up that 30-foot scale into these 18-inch chunks repeated 40 times around. And then you had these bars around the exterior, which were the other scale, which were the same thing. You can very quickly slide and position and do the calculation, and you can do it to 5 digits precision. Well, I came in possession, I'm foster caring for a Thacker calculating instrument, which we picked up at a shop that does some coin appraising for us. Nobody in the shop had any idea what this thing was, and Jill and I knew exactly what it was, and we knew its significance. We researched it, and over the past couple of weeks, I've been doing really a deep dive into the guy's patents. And I'm preparing a talk for maybe later this term on supercomputer of the 19th century. The device, it's quite entertaining. It's sold for $40 so it was manufactured from the 1890s until the 1940s. This was one of the most expensive personal calculating devices that you could get. It's extremely efficient. It does. There's a scale that does regular numbers. There's a scale that does powers. And you can very quickly do calculations that involve multiplying by or dividing by squares or cubes and square roots, cube roots. But it is one of the most fascinating things to me is how, and Deborah, you've used a slide rule.
I had to in physics.
So one of the things about a slide rule is you have to have a certain intuition about numbers. You have to have an understanding, because the scales you could be multiplying 1 times something, you could be multiplying 10 or 100 times something. That number 106 could be 1.06, okay? And you might be multiplying 1.06 times 5.235, okay? On the Thacker instrument, you do it like that. Okay, it's fascinating. At some point, perhaps before the end of the term, I'm going to bring in my Thacker calculating instrument, which is now worth, if you go by inflation, that 1916-17 price, it's worth about it would have cost $1,000 retail. If you try to buy one on eBay, it costs about $1,000, which is really kind of funny. It's in extremely good condition, and I'll show how to actually do these calculations. And it's really cool to have this device. Supposedly RPI has 2 of them. The Smithsonian has, although the archivist doesn't know anything about it and she won't let me in to see them. At this point, I know a hell of a lot more about it because I've studied the patents and that sort of thing. The Smithsonian has 3 of them, and there's assorted others in museum.
Museum? I mean,
we do. So RPI has an archive, and it's a fascinating archive. We do have an archive, and somehow connected to the archive are these devices, but I don't know how you get in to see this stuff. I tried to schedule an appointment, and they said we don't have we have some of his. So Edwin Thacker is although he's known for amongst calculating nerds for the invention of the Thacker calculating device or calculating instrument, he's mostly known for his bridge design and his steel work. He's
the Brooklyn Bridge guy?
No. That's Roebling. No, he's known for, there's a lot of smaller truss bridges. He was very innovative in truss bridges around the country. You can go and you can see there's bridges all over that have these plates on them dedicated to him. There's some innovations in steel that he made. He was involved in some monster patent suits. He was on the side of suing somebody because they were infringing on his innovations, and he used his calculating instrument in developing tables that were instrumental in both him and others designing these things. And if you look at his instruction booklet for the calculating instrument, it's fascinating because it's half of his book is application notes and how to do calculations for steel, how to do financial calculations, how to do these astronomical calculations. It's really pretty cool. So Thacker calculating instrument, supercomputer of the 19th century. If you got any questions, just let me know. No, you can't do R on it. I tried.
John, have you talked to Temple Gobert?
I don't know. I talked to it.
This is an archivist. All right, I can try to get you in.
Did you want to say?
Say
words of
something.
thanks?
Yes. So thanks everyone for coming out. It's really a privilege to be here with so many excited, smart, motivated people to bounce ideas off of, to help you evolve into people who are changing the world and will continue to change the world. I love the RPI motto of why not change the world. I mean, it's one of the reasons that I came here. It's one of the reasons I'm still here. And it is kind of what keeps me motivated. And I'm just trying to think, what am I doing? I'm trying to get money. I'm trying to have fun with AI. And I'm trying to rethink like pretty much everything I've done for the last 4 decades in artificial intelligence, because the explosion of LLMs, I was on the executive council of AAAI in the 90s, like mid 90s. And I took my first AI class actually as an undergrad in 1978. So I've been in AI, yes, I'm old, a long time. And I've never seen this kind of acceleration. And I've never seen, the impact of AI. Like I've never seen so many of my friends being interviewed by some world leaders and being like above the fold in the New York Times and, going to Washington and testifying. And I'm in the process of rethinking all my methodologies. And I'm in the process of rethinking our ontology engineering book. And I think all of us should be in the process of rethinking the methodologies that I know most of you are, more recent, minus John. Sorry. And to some extent, Enrique, but you're doing research, back in history as well. But it's time to really rethink how these emerging technologies are sensibly used in what we're doing today. You know, they're not going to solve, no technology is going to solve everything, but it's short-sighted to not think about these crazily evolving technologies and how they might impact our lives and how we might use them in hybrid, responsible, transparent settings. So that's kind of what's on my mind these days. But ultimately, I love being in your presence. So keep coming and keep those ideas coming and keep having great discussions, and and have fun. So with that, I'll end.
Go forth and conquer.
Yeah.
All right.